Good morning, everybody, and thanks to Green Foundation Ireland for having this political debate, because over the last decade we really didn't have a chance to politically argue the role of food safety and the role of food in Ireland, and it's very rare, and it's great to have this opportunity. And first of all, I suppose, as Green Party spokesperson for Agriculture and Food, I'd like to congratulate Minister Tom Hayes. It's great to see such a lovely, eloquent speech where he is agreeing with what we have stood for in the Green Party for the last 20 years on sustainability and green production. So even though we mightn't be elected, it's great that our influence is reaching the highest echelons of Irish politics. Now, with regards food safety, and I'm going to try and stick to food safety, the first thing I want to talk about is culture, and it's a few questions I have. So my first question to us all to think about is the current obsession we have in Ireland with food safety, is that going to have a detrimental effect on developing our own Irish food culture? Now, when I say developing our Irish food culture, we have to remember that we are a small island and we are possibly the youngest agricultural community in Europe, insofar as we have only had possession and ownership of our land and our produce for a couple of generations, maybe 120 years. And if you think about it, that's why we have such a strange relationship with food. When you go around Europe, people express their own cultural identities through their food from village to village, to town. And we don't really do that. We use music or sport to kind of identify who we are, and we've kind of ignored food. But that's not to say that we should be developing a food culture. And my worry is that maybe over the last decade we've drawn a line in the sand, and the only cultures that existed up to then we'll allow, and nothing else will be allowed in the future. In the future, we only will have packaged, processed, pasteurized food that is technically safe. And this is a kind of philosophical worry I have. And it's also a political worry. Now, another thing that fascinates me is when I'm in the south of France, I'm amazed that the small farmers in the south of France will elect a Green MEP. Could you imagine the small farmers of Ireland even contemplating voting for the Green Party? My God, could never happen. But it's a funny question. And then we've got people from Sinn Féin here in the Labour, like myself, on the left, so to say, of politics. We view food in Ireland and England, or good food, we view it as middle class, as elitist. But that is so far from the truth. If you travel across Europe, the people who love and want and fight to preserve for their good food come from the left. Even the slow food movement. Carlo Petrini got kicked out of the Communist Party because he had the audacity to question the quality of food that was served at their manifesto meetings in Rome. And he said, well, why do we have to eat crap food if we're communists? Why don't we eat food from our local farmers? And that was the origins of slow food. The origins of good food is not middle class. It transcends all class, whether working class, middle class, upper class. Food is a democratic right we have. And I want to ensure that we nurture that. And I want our children to enjoy purchasing and cooking food at home. And it's that love of food and culture that is the best tool we have to fight the epidemic of obesity and bad eating that's currently around in the country at the moment. So that's my little chat about culture. The next thing I want to address really is science. Now, this is a perfect place to address this topic. What is the function of science in our democracy? Because in case anybody hasn't realized, science has a very important role in our democracy. There are laws in this country which are created on the advice of scientific advisory committees. Science is very important, and it's time that all of us and all political parties started embracing science and looking at science, because for too long we've just ignored it, and it is a very important role in our society and the way our society is shaped. Take for instance, last Saturday on Countrywide on RTE, one of the most esteemed scientists in this country, Professor McConnell, publicly said that he would not debate the GM issue with anybody involved in politics. We were beneath him. We are not entitled to debate with such a high-minded and intellectual professor. Sure, what would we know? We know nothing. Well, I'll let you know, Professor McConnell. At the end of the interview, you said, and are you listening out there, public? Did you know most cheese is made with genetically modified rennet? Well, Professor, you're wrong. And another point, I had a long discussion about genetically modified rennet with your predecessor in 1997, a fantastic professor, Professor Tipton, Professor of Biochemistry in Trinity. And we discussed GM, and we discussed GM in society and antibiotic markings and its function, and we were wondering, would it take off in agriculture? And on the way out, Professor Tipton said to me, he said, "Seamus, you look after the cheese and I look after the science." And just on my way out the hall door, there was a little public loo or for guests in the hallway. He said, "Before you go, have a look at that cartoon." And he turned around and walked back into his study, closed the door. And on that cartoon, there was 3 scientists painting the bottom of a boat with a bucket saying TBT. And if you remember, TBT caused the entire collapse of the French shellfish industry. And the caption was, "Trust us, we're scientists." And you know, that cartoon is still relevant today as it was in 1997. So I want, and like on the GM issue, let's go back to that. 2 years ago, now regardless of what my opinions on GM, and I've been studying it for 15 years, and I might get thrown out of the Green Party for saying that there's some aspects of GM that I'm quite interested in, particularly in fighting climate change, soil, but there are certainly elements of GM that I'm very much skeptical of. But am I allowed an opinion? But what happened in this country when we decided to plant GM crops for the first time? It was Muggins here from the Green Party, the only person from any political party who would put up their head and debate it. Where was Fianna Fáil? Where was Fine Gael? Where was Sinn Féin? Where was the Labour Party? Zero. Property tax, property tax, property tax. And we need all political parties to engage in science and to engage in the technicalities of our food production. And not just come out before the election and say, "Oh, agricultural tourism is going to be great." It's much more, there's a lot going on that we need proper engagement with and proper discussions, and that's why it's great to have this opportunity here today. Now, as a Green, I cannot discuss food safety without giving a little maybe discussion about the environment. And when I was appointed to the board of Safe Food, I had a great idea for my first meeting. I was going to ask them, and here was my question: should the food safety authorities of Europe take into consideration the environmental consequences of all their directives? And I thought, this is a great question to ask, isn't it? And do you know something? I think it still is. Because the food safety cannot continue to act alone, solely and narrowly focused on food safety. The only thing we're concerned about if it's going to make you throw up in the morning. We are not concerned about the environment. We are not, now we are slowly addressing this, but it must be addressed. Food safety is a very, very broad church, and it must take into consideration so many different areas, and not just on what we would call traditional elements of pollution like packaging or over-packaging. We must address food waste. We are wasting 50% of the food we're purchasing in this country. Yeah. Think about it, okay? Secondly, we must address food security. I remember when I was on the board of Safe Food, we were told that every single food premises in Ireland has now been inspected. We are safe, we're good to go. And I just said, everything's refrigerated below 4 degrees. But what would happen if there was a power cut? Everything would become illegal overnight. Oh, there's not going to be a power cut. Well, I remember my dad growing up in Dublin, bringing us up to Tree Rock Mountain to look at the power cuts in Dublin at night time, because you could see one side of the city going on and off. We thought it was great crack. And, the idea that there might be a power cut, considering we import 96% of our fuel, is, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. So food security must be certainly addressed as a food safety issue and food security for our country. Now, and also, if we look at the environment, and this is a more philosophical question, I'm involved in a debate about the future of aquaculture in Ireland, and we're not going to go into it now, but it's a fascinating debate about salmon farming, and particularly in Galway and Galway Bay. But one item that came up to me, I was raising concerns about the antibiotic use in salmon farming. And the answer was, well, don't worry, because the salmon is safe to eat because we hold it for a few weeks and we get rid of the antibiotic residue. But that wasn't my point. It might be safe for us humans and wealthy Westerners to consume, but what about the antibiotic footprint it's leaving behind in its production? What about the antibiotic footprint that would be left behind in Galway Bay for generations and generations to come? What about the antibiotic footprint it would leave behind with all the non-target species consuming the food laced with antibiotics? That is a question. The question is not simply, will it be safe for us wealthy Western Europeans to eat? We must address much wider issues of food safety. So that is kind of, I really want to see the role of the environment and the role of food safety working more closely together in the future. Now, globalization. Here's a question for us all, and particularly for Professor Riley. Do you think that the food safety in Europe in the past 10 years has not been for our benefit at all? Here's a question. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just posing the question. Has food safety simply been created as an advertising tool for the further corporatization and globalization of our food system? Might sound a very lefty comment, but just think about it. When did it all start? BSE. That's when the Food Safety Authority really got its power. Up to then, we had food safety was a method of inspecting premises, which is, I really agree with, and, you know, ensuring basic hygiene. But it was BSE, and it wasn't there. What it was trying to tell us was they were trying to assure the customer that the food we eat is safe. But who benefited from that? It was the large food processors. And then we look down through the next decade, and where, as Eamon O'Keefe pointed out, where have all the scandals come from? Not the small processor, not the small farmer, but from industry. And yet, all the rules that are there are the same rules that have to be applied no matter how small a producer you are. So there are huge questions we have to address with the function of food safety in Ireland. And I mean, I don't want to address it again because I can't be at two places at one time. I'd love to be down at the GM conference with the EPA today. But we have to think of these questions. Here's another question. What would happen if in my cheese shop I took out a shotgun when an environmental health officer came in? What would happen to me if I got some of my mates and surrounded the car an environmental health officer was in? What would happen to me if I put the names and addresses of environmental health officers up on the internet? But think about it. An environmental health officer in our society has the exact same powers invested in them as an officer of the National Parks and Wildlife. But we couldn't give a toss about what they come across. I don't see the Irish Times publishing every month with dutiful diligence the list of everybody who did environmental pollution in Ireland, but I can guarantee you that every month or 6 months they will produce every takeaway that didn't pass its food safety laws. So why is one thing important and the other not? It's a reflection of our society, a society where we've become too lazy to make our own decisions, a society where a judge will compensate somebody 10,000 euros because they find a caterpillar in their food. That is disgraceful. And it's not the Food Safety Authority's problem. It's the legal problem. If you look at our farmers, not only are they price takers now for multinationals, they also have to produce food that they can't be sued over, lace it with pesticides. So, you know, we really need to address what is safe food and what is safe food for our economy and what is safe food for us as people. Now, I want to finish on maybe something positive and political, because this is a political, we're in the European Parliament, so let's keep it political. I have a few questions. I enjoy the odd can of Coke. I'm sure I've had some. You know, I enjoy going getting my odd comestibles in Tesco's or in Joyce's in Knocknacarra, my local supermarket. But what on earth was our Minister for Agriculture launching Tesco's expansion on the radio a few weeks ago on Morning Ireland? Tesco's are a fine company. They've got excellent employee rights and a fair play to them. But why should the minister choose them above any other company to launch a few weeks ago? It's just a political question. Why, in our sustainability conference a few weeks ago, did we pick the 8 companies to speak? Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Nestle, Pepsi, at our Sustainable Food Conference. What's going on? Where's the balance? I am not saying that anything in these companies are wrong, and fair play to them. I'm just saying we need balance. We need balance in our society. We need balance with the future regulations on food safety and our culture. We need a balanced approach to science. One of my friends and a good advisor who's a professor, his lab has been nominated in a few weeks' time for the best lab in the industry. And he's furious. He said, since when do I work for an industry? I work for a university. I am not an industrial engineer. I am a scientist. We need balance. And Nessa, you mentioned earlier you're going to address food poverty. Well, just be careful, because we are being videoed, and there are people all over the world working on $1 a day, and we are going to discuss here about poverty in Ireland, the 10th or 11th richest country on the planet. And this is not coming from me who owns a posh tea shop. This is coming from me who has worked for the last 25 years with children from very, very challenging backgrounds and continue to do so. We have a poverty of access. We have a poverty of cuisine. But please, when we're using the word poverty, remember our fellow citizens on the globe. We are so lucky in this country. So let's not, jump far too much to the left and say, oh, this is terrible. It's not. There's an awful lot we have to do, but we're very, very rich. So we need balance. And we need balance on globalization and corporatization of our food. And if I wanted, and again, just being political, last year Minister Coveney said the greatest day in the history of Irish agriculture was that Kerry Foods were going to open a research centre. Look, it was a great day for Irish agriculture. But it was not the greatest day. Kerry Foods are not the greatest company in Irish agriculture. Kerry Foods, and fair play to them, they produce fridge raiders. I don't know, 25, 35 euros a kilo, designed for children for lunch snacks. From chicken, they probably pay for 60 cents a kilo. They produce commodity food. Do you know what Kerry Foods and our big companies, yes, they employ thousands of people, but if you add up every employee for every Eurotalk registered restaurant in Ireland, I guarantee you that they will employ much more than any of our food corporations. And they need the same support as you give to large food companies. And lastly, and what I would love to see from all political parties engaging in, think of the Queen coming here to Ireland, and think of the English market in Cork. And if we really want a safe environment for our food and an access that we can keep the fantastic small farmers that Eamon so eloquently talked about on the west of Ireland, and I agree with him all on CAP, and I'll be running for election against them next year, so I'll get into that later. But yes, we do need, what can we do to keep our mixed agriculture going? What can we do to feed ourselves? We need civic markets. And yes, I was involved in setting up farmers' markets in the last few years. But we need now to move on from that. And I want Galway, Limerick, Sligo, Athlone, Letterkenny, Drogheda and Dock with properly built, covered markets where people can have their businesses, pass them on from generation to generation, and we can access the fantastic and local food that we produce in a safe manner in this country. Thank you very much.